You're listening to the Perth Property Show, Australia's only weekly property podcast by West Australian experts for West Australian listeners. Catch your latest episode every Monday at 7 a.m.
Good morning, Perth. Welcome to a beautiful spring morning on the 7th of October. It is Trent here, your host of the Perth Property Show. As always, we spend every Monday morning getting subject matter experts and the number one real estate agent in for a new suburb to have a chat about what's going on in the market. And today's a special one. I thought instead of getting an external subject matter expert in to talk about finance or tax, I thought I would look back at the questions we're getting on our website. They're starting to bank up, and I thought instead of trying to wait for the next subject matter expert to come in, we'd smash them all out in one Q&A episode. So it's just me today. Hopefully that's okay with everyone. We're going to kick straight into a range of questions on interest rates, subdivision, general market stuff. So first question we have today, it is Steve from Padbury. Steve's asked, there's a lot of spin in the property market at the moment. 1 second it's going back up, the next it's staying down. What is actually going on, Trent? Well, Steve, I guess the reason 1 second it's going up and the other second it's going down is because every week you'll get new organizations coming out with new data. So that might be CoreLogic or REWA, places like that. And then news outlets such as The West come out and cherry pick little piece of information to see what headline they can grab. And usually it really doesn't make sense when you piece them all together over the space of a couple of weeks. Most of the time it's alarmist because that's what sells papers and gets people's eyes on the TV. Now, what is actually going on? For me, I can really only explain the situation with the analogy I usually use, and that is the smart money moves first. Now, that may seem a little condescending to some, but the reality is, for me at least, what I notice and I see on both sides of the cycle is that both on an upward swing or a downward swing, it is the most expensive suburbs that make that first movement. What we're seeing at the moment, Steve, is a market where you've got the western suburbs hitting days on market stats that are pretty much at just under boom levels. They're in the early 40s now, so anything in the 30s would be considered really a upward market. So places like Gwelup, Shenton Park, Floreat, Wembley, Netherlands, all these places are now in the early 40s for days on market stat. So that's a sign that the buyer-seller market really quite tight there, and we haven't really seen a lot of price growth yet, but we definitely haven't seen any losses. So that market there is pretty solid already. It's really that market from, I'd say, 800,000 down that is still waiting for buyer pressure. That's what it is. The selling side, people are putting properties on the market just like they did a year ago. Nothing's really changed on the selling side of the equation. It's the buying side where we're waiting to see just more volume, and that's more confidence. That's people having more disposable equity. Not just income, but equity. A good part of that equation is that the assessment rates, the serviceability side of things really has been helped out by the backing off of banks in the last few months. So people really should be able to afford those loans if they're aspirational to do so on that upgrade. But it's really people's availability of equity, I think. A lot of people are expecting to be able to sell out of their home, have a certain amount of money and then move out, but they're probably finding that when they get an appraisal from the real estate agent, it's just not there at the moment. And that's because the weakest market is the market underneath about $450,000. These are the people that have most likely been hit hardest from the downturn of the mining boom. They're the ones that have gone into jobs where they were paid double what they used to be paid and then have set their lives up that way and now looking for jobs back at that original $70,000, $80,000 a year. And that's what people are finding tough is dealing with those loans. And that's why you have that mortgagee in possession level, which is a lot higher at the lower end of the market. So really, what I would say is we've got two tiers of an economy right now. We've got a property market that is above the $800,000 range, which is actually getting on with it. Things are moving along. And then you've got most of the rest of the market there where, as a sliding scale, from 800 to 500, if you've got a good property, it sells fine. If you're the worst property on the street, it's not going to do well. And then under that $500,000 mark, you really want to have new product to be doing well, and if not, then you probably won't be getting, as a seller, the money you're looking for. So that's getting a lot of people also to hold back and wait, essentially. Next question. And from Wattle Grove, I've just refinanced. My mortgage is now under 3%. We would like to move out of Wattle Grove, but don't want to sell right now. Any ideas? And Anna, this is a situation I think where if you maybe just like to get out of the suburb in terms of a lifestyle, there's probably no better time than to put your property up as a rental. You most likely be positively geared. Rents are starting to tick up now, which is a good sign as a leading indicator for property prices in general. You'll most likely find that it won't cost you anything to rent your property out and have that pay for the mortgage. And then you can go live in a suburb for the time being where you're more aspirational for. See if that suits you. And then hopefully over the next year or so, Wattle Grove does get a bit more strength. And you might even be able to find you could sell to the tenant, for example. So these ideas there just give you that ability to move on with your life without being stuck or feeling stuck with the asset you've got. Separate the idea of house and home. Next question, Baz from Willagee. Hi guys, I own a property in Willagee and was wondering if I could subdivide it. How do I find out? Will I make any money? Okay, Baz, first place you would go, the easiest place to really identify this in Willagee is what are your neighbours up to? Has anyone in your street done a subdivision? Maybe it's a house behind a house or a knockdown and a triplex. Willagee's got a couple of zonings that I really recognise, and that's an R25 or an R40. They've got some R2060 back onto the Leach Highway area as well. But I'm thinking you're probably in that R25 space if you're thinking about subdivision. And hopefully if you are, you most likely will be able to subdivide as most of those properties are 700 square metres. Now, how do you find this out for sure? Well, I would be going on to the City of Melville Intramaps website. So just type in City of Melville Intramaps and that will give you an understanding. You can just go on the mapping system and it should have some layered detail there as to what the zoning is. If you have any further questions about that, you can always give us a buzz at the Perth Property Show. Siobhan McHale is a great real estate agent out there as well. I would say you should give her a call too, and she should be able to give you some more information. Will you make any money? Well, it depends on what you paid for the house you're living in, the house you own. But generally, there's a bit of money to be made in Willagee right now. The change up isn't amazing, but there's still some profit being made in Willagee from what I'm seeing from people on the street. I really would say that is dependent on what you paid for the initial block. However, in general, that exercise of subdivision, as long as you do it efficiently on a cost and time basis, really should make you money anyway. How much just depends on what you paid in the first place. Hope that answers the question. Aaron from Bayswater. Hi Trent, you focus a lot on property development in the show and it's good to know about the zoning each week from different agents, but where can I learn how to actually do a development or a subdivision without a builder trying to sell me something? Aaron, awesome question. Enjoy that question. What that means for us on the property show is we need to maybe get a little bit deeper, maybe get a subject matter expert in to chat more about development. So I hope that would prick a few people's ears up. In terms of getting a crash course, there are a couple of masterclasses, sort of subdivision workshops around town. We've got one at Strategic that we hold at UWA, and the next one's actually this Saturday. 4 hours of super dense information, exercises, case studies. It's a real team environment down there. We cap it out at 25-ish people so that everyone gets involved. So that will run you through exactly how to get on with the idea and the economics of it and make sure you're not getting ripped off and make sure you just understand the processes and why you're doing it in the first place. But yeah, I would say there's a couple of those around town, and at the very least, start joining some forums and we'll make sure that we start putting a bit more information on the property show about that. Maddie from Sorrento. Trent, if you had $450,000 in your pocket today, would you buy in Karratha or Perth? That is a very good question. I think it depends on your goals and your risk profile. Every property, every market has a different buyer and different reasons to get in. If you were looking to get in and out on a passive hold for the next couple of years, I would not go past Karratha. There's obviously its risk factors involved, but that place has the fundamentals for some real growth in the next couple of years. However, you have to understand that if you're in it for a passive hold, generally you want to be in for 10 to 20 years, and there are some serious extreme roller coaster rides to sustain throughout a investment journey in Karratha. So be aware of that. But if it's for a short time, I would say that getting into Karratha now would be the time if you're planning on doing that. Just also be aware that much higher costs in terms of maintenance and insurance. So the yields aren't as sexy as they seem, but they are still very good. They're consummate to the risk. But if it was a medium term or a development you're looking to do, where you're looking to extract quite a bit of wealth from that development, Perth is the way to go. Karatha's a no-go zone for that sort of thing. But with Perth, you really need to know your demographic, your pockets, your suburbs, your local planning policies. I highly recommend before you would do that, you definitely skill up in that space. Learn from the experts. Hope that one answered that, Maddie. Vince from Hall's Head. We're getting through these quick. I've got 4 properties around Mandurah, and none of them are going anywhere. Yeah, I would have thought so. That Mandurah has really struggled in the last few years, Vince, so I understand that. Should I suck it up and hold, or sell up and get myself a development closer to Perth? Okay, this depends really on your personal situation. I always say don't sell unless you have to. Now, the reason you would sell and the have to part, really it comes down to if you are adamant you want to move on with your development or property ownership goals, I should say, your investment portfolio, and the only way you'll have the serviceability or the equity to do so is by selling up one of your properties or 2 or 3 of your properties in Mandurah, then that's what you have to do. You would start by understanding which of the 4 properties you currently have is the least profitable opportunity in the future, which one do you think maybe has the most maintenance concerns or is the least likely to have growth in the future, is the most hassle for you, and you would sell that one. That's the one you would divest, you would liquidate. That may be the one that gets you far enough in terms of equity or servicing to move on in Perth in a development that you've said, then that's what you would do. It really comes down to thinking in this way. I like to think of my investment choices as if I didn't own those properties in the first place. So obviously there's a transactional cost being selling fees, capital gains cost too if you've made a profit to consider. But I always like to ask, if I didn't own these 4 properties in Mandurah in the first place, would I buy them again, or would I go on do that development property purchase and process with that money? Now, the answer for me, if it was me in this situation, would certainly not be to buy any of those properties in Mandurah, just to be straight up with you. So I would say if that is holding you back, start selling off your least profitable holds in the future in Mandurah, as many as you need to essentially to get on with your goals in Perth. However, if you don't need to do that and the banks will let you lend or you've got the equity to move forward, then don't sell and hope for some gains and move on with your goals in Perth. All right, final question we've got, and it is from Averley. It is Amy. Hi, Trent. I tried to refinance, but the bank told me I can't because I don't have any equity in my home. The repayments are killing me. Do you have any solutions? P.S. My interest rate is 4.05%. Amy, I'm really sorry to hear this. I do have to say, though, this is not a surprise in Averley. I've seen a lot of this in that area. The tough part, I guess, for Averley is there's a couple of points here. There's a lot of people here are on Key Start loans that have been organised through the building companies. This puts you in a very precarious position from day one, not really having any fat there if the market does drop. But it also means that you don't have 20% and you wouldn't be able to refinance until you made 20% in the market, of which we've all seen Ellenbrook, Averley, they've all lost 20-30% at least in the last few years. So you're that far behind on it. The reality is also there's just a massive oversupply in Ellenbrook and Averley, and it's not going to stop. There's unlimited land on that frontier of Perth, and even if you had a massive increase in demand, all that's going into house and land packages because everyone wants a sexy new home in that area, and it just goes 1 for 1 with the supply. So I don't see growth happening, Amy, unfortunately. I think you've got a couple of options here. Sell out, cut your losses. I think that's a real option for you to consider in Averley. And again, this is just general advice. I'm really not sure of your personal situation any further than this. But if you're not keen on selling, you're happy living there, it's just a family home and you enjoy that lifestyle, which is totally fair enough. The last option you really have, given you can't refinance, would be to switch over to a fixed rate. If you're in 4.05%, fixed rates are now in the 2% for owner-occupied properties. So hopefully you're not with Keystart, and if that's the case, your bank should have a fixed rate option that is below 3% really now, or at least in the low 3s. So that should save you a good 25% on your interest payments for the month, and hopefully that's enough to keep your head above water until things look a little rosier in the area. Guys, thanks a lot for that. I know that was a really quick in and out. I'm hoping that was a fresh change up from our usual setup. Now, today for our Suburb Spotlight, we are talking about Carine. To have that conversation, we've got our number one agent for Carine. It is Carine Riches. Carine, thank you very much for coming. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Carine is one of those family strongholds in the north. For me, I look at it like a Winthrop or a Dianella sort of suburb where it hasn't really had massive hit in terms of prices going up or down. It really has its purpose. It's a very safe family community, but it's also, a suburb where people aspire to be as well.
Yeah, it's a very resilient suburb, I think. I kind of compare it to a blue chip style stock. It's something that performs well in no matter what the market's doing. It's probably one of the first to go up and one of the last to come down. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that it's more of a second and third home purchase area. So people are moving there for a need as opposed to a want. So it doesn't get as affected by market movement as like a first home buyer area does.
You're right. I guess that sentiment really is, if they're going to buy in, it's for the long term. And whether there's a little bit of fear or even pressure in the market, it doesn't really affect the people that are selling, and those motivations aren't as strong or needy, I guess, as some other suburbs.
Absolutely, and the stock levels in there are quite low as well for the suburb. There's only an average of 80 to 90 sales a year in there, with homes of there's 2,000, just over 2,300. So not a lot comes on the market, and people that are in the suburb don't really move that often. People are buying in there for the whole school life, really, because it's very school focused area. So they're moving in for from primary school all the way to their kids finish up at high school. So they're there for 15, 20, 30 years is very common in that area.
I guess you can be. It's also in a price point where you could probably do well on a renovation 10 years in as well, and it wouldn't be a waste of money.
Yeah, if done right, definitely. I guess the land value component's still quite high there, though, for the age of the houses, so it does depend on the home. It's probably not the type of area that, you would flip a property, for instance. But,
No.
If you're staying there for a longer term, it's forgiving, I guess.
Now, you just referenced the age of the properties. Can you give us some background as to when properties were first built in this area? When was Carine first annexed as a suburb? And some fun facts, some history. We always like to talk about something a little bit interesting about our suburb before just getting into the numbers.
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, I guess it was originally developed into market gardens and farms in the 60s. And then through the 1970s, I think it was, the Reed Highway was put in. And that really kind of put it a bit more on the map.
Would have opened the whole suburb up.
Yeah, yep. And then the high school came in 1973, and then kind of from 75 onwards, that was when the residential side got developed. Fun fact for Carine, I guess the name of it was derived from two swamps in the area. So that's quite interesting, and the swamps are still there, and it's still such a big part of the suburb as well. The Carine open space and parklands take up over a third of the suburb. So it's a really nice, comfortable area, but still close to the beach and close to access to the freeways and the city. So it's very convenient for people.
We hear about this place called Carine Glades Estates.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit more about what that means?
Well, funnily enough, Carine Glades Estate isn't actually part of Carine. A lot of people think it is. It's actually in Duncraig.
There you go, right?
Yeah.
So what happened there? Someone just looked at the map wrong and thought, oh, geez.
Yeah, I don't know, to be honest. But yeah, a lot of people do associate it with Carine, and it is just north of Carine. Carine finishes at Beach Road, and it's just on the other side. But I guess it was developed at a later stage. But it isn't actually technically part of Carine.
Do you see a lot of movement between suburbs, between Duncraig and Carine? There's obviously, you have school zones as well that cut off but overlap.
Particularly in the last few years when they changed the zoning through City of Joondalup, because Duncraig is in City of Joondalup and Carine's in City of Stirling. And when they changed the zoning through there, we saw quite a big trend, and still are, of people selling out of Duncraig and moving into Carine to avoid the development. So people, I guess, were maybe originally buying into Duncraig on these bigger homes, bigger blocks for that lifestyle. And then when it was all changed, then a lot of those people weren't really comfortable with that living anymore, that type of apartments next door scenario. So we had a big influx of buyers then looking into Carine, because Carine is still in the R20 single residential zoning.
I guess the demographics be pretty similar.
Oh, absolutely. I guess Duncraig's got Duncraig High School that covers a lot of the suburb, mind you, from Warwick Road South, that is in the Carine high school boundary at the moment. So there is still an overlap, and I do sell both suburbs, but yeah, there's there's more of an overlap between South Duncraig and Carine than the northern part.
When I look at that, I use an analogue of the Rossmoyne, Willerton sort of area where you've got the same sort of effect of school zonings where things overlap in half of a suburb and whatnot.
Yeah.
You notice that half of the suburb really does have a lot more strength in that buyer-seller relationship in good times and bad. And when you've got, that's why obviously we're talking about Carine here, but for Duncraig, when you're talking about that school, it's got both of those great schools always putting that pressure on.
It does, yeah. And it's interesting, even within the suburb, there's different pockets of demand. Like the walkability to the school is a huge thing, and I've kind of named the different zones of Carine as central Carine, which is around the school, and then there's an eastern and a southern Carine as well, of what I call it. But there's demand within that. People want to be in that walking distance to the school. There's generally a higher price to be paid because of that. Whereas when you go into that South Duncraig, that you've got to walk over Beach Road, which is quite a busy road. So, the interest is still more around walking to the school, definitely. And you've got the primary school there as well, right next door. So
I guess when we're talking about the school so much, my assumption would be that the people buying from you are young parents, in that maybe 40-year-old parents, and selling from you would be mid-50s parents whose kids have come through the other end. Is that correct?
Pretty much, yeah. So we do still get a couple of young couples that are thinking for the future, but mainly it's people with younger kids that are wanting to take their kids to the primary school there, or depending on the house, the next level up would be maybe a teenage family that are just entering the high school side. So and definitely your sellers are your baby boomers at the moment, really, in their 60s and 70s generally, or people that might be moving to be closer to the beach, a more aspirational move. A lot of people move from Carine through to the other side of Marmion Avenue, as they say, North Beach, Marmion, yeah.
Yep, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's what that next level of density around those areas is for that transition if they want it. And I like the idea that Carine is protected in that way to still provide that family lifestyle and only that family lifestyle. The other question I have for you is, we see this a lot in Greenwood, Kingsley. We've had the top agents there have a chat about this. Is there an insularity in the suburb where the kids will come through and then come back? Have you seen much of that?
Absolutely, you're spot on actually. We do see a lot of people that have grown up in Carine or have gone to the Carine High School, and they're moving back for their next life stage of having kids, and they're thinking of that for them. And it's funny that you say that because it's so true in there. Yeah. A lot of people have got that memory of being in a good area and going to a good school. And the school is performing really well at the moment as well. In the last 4 or 5 years, it's really picked up. So that's become even more important.
I think it's always had a good name.
It has, yeah. I guess the new principal, not new anymore, but the principal that they have there now, Damien Shuttleworth, has done some really big things since he's come as well, and that's really picked it up.
Let's talk about price points.
Yeah.
How cheap of a house can I buy in Carine if I want to just get in?
Well, I guess there's duplexes available. So you could get a duplex that needs work, probably you could get a 2-bedroom if you really wanted to get into the area at around that 400 level. These
pretty old? I mean, there's no subdivision, right? So these must have been old duplex halves.
Yep, 70s built.
Yep.
Or early 70s built. So you can get a 2-bedroom for around that 4, and then a 3-bedroom duplex. You're probably looking starting at 450, going up to mid-5s, depending on the level of renovation. As far as houses go, you're probably looking more, a knockdown style house would be in that 550 to 600 range.
Land value?
Yeah, really.
Yep.
Depending on the location in the area. And then a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom, probably still 70s built home would be around that 750 range.
Yep.
And then going up from there, really.
How high does it get? What's the most expensive property Karen Richards has sold?
My record sale for the area, which has only just changed and beaten by another agent, was 1.35 million.
Look, I guess it shows that you can have some real nice places in Carine.
Yeah, and that was a single residential home on a really beautiful location, one of the more well-known streets of the area called Monash.
Yep.
And it was on the park, and it was only a few years old.
Carine?
Yeah, definitely. Parkland views. There is a couple of streets on the western side of Carine that are quite elevated around Hazelwood Loop and Crestbrook Way that have some water views, or glimpses, I guess I would call them.
I'm guessing these are the ones that can command 7 figures if they wanted to with the right house.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess they're a newer home as well, newer for Carine. So more of your late 80s build.
I find that interesting. Along that whole northern strip, it always seems like the last estate that was developed was the most western estate.
Yeah, I guess there are other pockets too, but yeah, I don't know why it is that way.
Well, it leads well into having some pretty strong values on that western side, where these days the value would be on the western side of all of those suburbs, just given its proximity to the beach.
True, very true.
Now let's talk about development.
Yes.
This is an R20 suburb.
It is.
Most blocks
are
very
rare.
Not 1,000 square metres or even 900 square metres. They'd all be in the 700s, I assume.
Yeah.
Doesn't lead well for development.
No,
However,
it doesn't.
What do we have that's come in the last couple of years that really has given a little bit renewal and some pressure on prices?
Yeah, obviously the corner block scenario with the WPC change of guidelines means that you can subdivide, well, if you've got the right frontage on a corner block and you're more than 700 square metres. So we are seeing a fair bit of that starting to happen.
What are they selling
in the area? The blocks on their own between $4 to $450. If something's built on there, a new, say, 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom with a home theatre, you might sell for $750.
Yep.
That single level.
Yep.
Yeah.
And what am I buying in at though for that old project site?
To develop,
Yeah.
I guess to make it worthwhile, you'd probably be wanting to pick up something in the 600s.
Is that possible?
Yeah, they don't come up very often. No.
Yeah, and I think you need to be on Karen Rich's email list to pick that up.
You do, yeah. And I guess also people that have owned the properties there for some time, it's usually them developing it.
You're self-developing.
Exactly. They want to stay in the area.
The equity or the income or the savings to most likely do that if they wanted to.
Yeah.
Knock it down, rent out for a year and move back into one of them.
I'd say 90% of them are that way.
Wow.
That they've owned the house forever and they want to stay in the area, and when they look at, I guess, the changeover and the pricing, it is better sometimes for them to just stay where they are and develop it.
Yeah, just make some cash on the way through, but also get rid of that big old backyard and still have the same location.
Yeah, that's it. But there is obviously still such a big demand for the bigger homes in Carine, the smaller downsizer type homes. Yeah, it's still not quite there yet. I think most people who are downsizing out of Carine do still want to move to that coastal element. So
Carine's not the destination for the downsize.
Not always, no. Unless you want familiarity, can't even say. Unless you want something familiar.
Yep.
It's more for I guess a family suburb.
Do you see 10, 15 years from now a change up into that space, or do you always see Carine as being a real family stronghold where especially in the city of Stirling, which has probably overcooked it and realised it in the way that they've rezoned things, recognised from the locals, look, we don't want any more density here. The reason we come here is for that family lifestyle.
I think it's inevitable, but yeah, I guess as far as the next 10 or 15 years go, I think it'll still be a very strong school family suburb. I can't see it being too developed like the other suburbs. And I guess I compare it to City of Joondalup, and when they did their rezoning, it took 10 years of them talking about it before they even did it.
Lots of back and forth with the community, and ended up obviously being strategic pockets around train stations and those places. And I think there's probably a place for that in every suburb, around the train station, immediately around the school. So I think Carine could probably do with that itself anyway at some point, but it doesn't seem like there's a necessity for it right now.
No, and perhaps not the demand for it either, because it's just been done through Duncraig and surrounding suburbs, so we don't need the infill.
Karen, last question. What's the median house price in Carine?
It's sitting almost at 800 again now.
I guess that gives you a little bit of scope here for the next question that comes in, part B. If you had that in your pocket, Karen, 800 grand, what would you buy? I
would probably do a development. I'd probably buy a corner lot and develop it that way, or alternatively, probably I love the 1980s homes. I love the style of them, the open plan. It's almost a modern design, so That would probably be my second choice, yeah.
I think that covers most of the suburb, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
Lucky you. Carine Richards, thank you very much for coming in and chatting, Carine. It's been a very informative but also concise episode, really. We'll have you in again, I guess, in a year when we've got some more updates and hopefully on a market side, some even more positive things to say.
Let's hope so.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Perth Property Show. If you've only just joined the conversation, you can catch up by heading over to our website, perthpropertyshow.com.au, subscribing to the podcast, or joining our Facebook page. Don't forget to tune in next Monday at 7 a.m. for more expert insights, local analysis, and suburb spotlights. Happy hunting!